Thank you, Lois. And so this isn't why I put that reading in there, but it really does upset me to read something like that and then read, I'm not even a baseball fan. Like, then give the ticket to somebody else. I'm going to comment a little more on that reading at the end. So I want you guys to hang on to it. There is a point there that really comes in at the end about the power and especially the nature of that invitation to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So during the Christmas season, I sit down every single Sunday. I come to church. I pull all of the Christmas cards out of my mailboxes, and I go home and I sit down and I open them up. Read what's on the inside, collect any gift card that happened to be in there or may not have been in there. And then since the time I was little, Christmas cards always got taped to the back of the front door. And it's just part of the Christmas decorations. This year, the stack of Christmas cards that I got contains something unique. As I was going through the stack of Christmas cards, there was one piece of paper in there that wasn't a Christmas card. It was an invitation. It was an invitation to Tanya's housewarming party. There's something special about receiving an invitation. Now in full transparency, as I comment on this, I was unable to be there. Right, but there's still something special about, especially knowing Tanya and knowing everything that her life has been through, everything she's been through in the last year, and the changes that her life that she's gone through, and she's entering into this new phase of life with a new house, a new routine, new friends, and I made the list to be one of the people to welcome in this new stage of her life. Right? Like there's something special about being on the list, right? About like receiving an invitation lets you know that you're loved. Another place we hand out invitations is weddings. Planning a wedding can be an incredibly stressful task, from the venue to the food to the decorations, and then we have to sit down and decide who to invite. Most of us, right, when we were getting married, couldn't afford to invite absolutely everybody that we wanted to invite, especially today. You hire a caterer for an event. They tell you that it's going to be $5 a plate. Until they find out it's a wedding, then they tell you it's going to be $50 a plate. That just seems to be the way that the pricing works. And so you have to decide who you're going to invite and who you don't. And right, in the process of that, unfortunately, there's people that make the list that you don't want on the list, right? Like your Aunt Barb and your Uncle Steve. I don't have an Aunt Barb and an Uncle Steve, but you know who I'm talking about, right? Mark Lowry described them as the people you'll cry at their funeral, but you won't go on vacation with them, right? Those people, right? I do have an Uncle Mike, though. My Uncle Mike lives out in California. As Christina and I were deciding over who to send invitations to at our wedding, and I added him to the list, and she said, well, why is he going to come? Right? And I said, no, he's not going to come. But he gets an invitation for two reasons. One, because I know he's going to send a gift. Right? But two, because I've had the chance to go out and visit my Uncle Mike, and on his refrigerator are the save the dates and the invitations to the events that he couldn't make it to. Right? And so he gets an invitation because he's loved, and he loves us. There's something special about an invitation. Something special about being invited to something. Our word for 2025 is invited. This is our word this year. As we head into this year, we're going to be chasing down this word. And I think for us, right, as a church, I think invitation is the single greatest tool that we have to leverage, whether it's for this church or for this community. Right? One, I think it's the single greatest tool that we have in evangelism. Evangelism has changed over the last 20, 30 years, where when I talk to individuals and they want advice on how to share their faith with someone, as I probe, I check, it's not even just an evangelism. There's just something about us where we have this desire where we want to win the conversation. Right? We want to talk to someone, and we want them to admit that they're wrong and we're right. Right? We do this with politics. We do this with conversations around sex and gender, and we do it. I think it seems to be our default in evangelism, right? Where we want to argue with the non-believer and convince the non-believer, right, that they're wrong and we're right. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be just throw that habit in the trash and never pick it back up again. I think the greatest tool that we have in evangelism is an invitation. Rather than arguing, invite. Invite them into your home, invite them into your life, and invite them to church. I think it's the single greatest tool that we have in evangelism. I also think it's the single greatest tool that we have in church growth. Wherever it is that you find yourself as a part of a ministry, a part of a small group, a part of whatever it is that you happen to be a part of, if you see an empty seat and you want that seat to be filled, the single greatest tool that you have to leverage is a personal invitation to someone, hey, come with me. Why don't you come to church with me? Why don't you come to Bible study with me? Why don't you come to the men's breakfast with me? The single greatest tool that we have. If you want that seat filled, I am a believer that, I'm going to be kind and I'm going to put it in the bulletin for you and in emails and those sorts of places. But the single most productive thing that you have to find somebody new sitting beside you is to walk up to the individual and say, hey, I love you enough that I want to see you sitting beside me. An invitation communicates love. Everything that we encounter in life is an invitation. Every trial and temptation, right, is an invitation to choose holiness and to grow. Every failure that we experience is an invitation to learn. Every hurt that somebody casts on us is an invitation to forgive. Every hurt and pain that happens to touch our soul is an invitation to crawl onto the lap of an almighty God. And so we're going to search those things this year as we look at what it means to be invited. We're going to look at a parable that Jesus told this morning about an invitation. I want to invite you guys to open your Bibles or turn them on to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew is in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are the first four books of the New Testament. So right up at the beginning of the New Testament. As you guys are opening them up or turning them on, by the time we get to Matthew 22, this is near the end of Jesus' earthly ministry. It's actually in the middle of what we call Holy Week. So like Palm Sunday has already happened. Right? He's already rode the donkey into Jerusalem, and they've laid the palms on the road, welcoming him in as a king. He's already gone into the temple and overturned the money changers, and so he's really started to anger religious leadership that they're at least thinking about planning on killing Jesus if they haven't already started putting together the plan on how they're going to kill Jesus. And so all of that is happening. As well, Jesus tells another parable that I think helps to set the stage for this parable. Matthew 22 says, again, Jesus spoke to them in parables. And so he's following up on this continual teaching of parables. And right before this parable, he tells a parable about a farmer who had bought some land. He proceeded to plant a vineyard on the land, and he hired some individuals to live on the vineyard, care for the vineyard as he went away. Well, when it came time to collect the fruit from the vineyard, the farmer did not show up himself. He sent some servants. And so the servants showed up, and those who were caring for the vineyard killed the servants that he sent. So the farmer sent some more servants to go and collect the fruit. At which point, the tenants that were on the vineyard, they killed those servants as well. So this time, the farmer steps up his game, and he says, I'm going to send my son, because they'll respect my son. They'll listen to my son. And so the farmer sends his son, at which point the tenants of the vineyard kill his son as well. And Jesus poses the question, how do you think that the owner of the vineyard is going to treat those tenants whenever he gets to them? And the scriptures say that the scribes, the religious leaders, the chief priests, and the Pharisees, they knew that Jesus was talking about them. And so with that stage set, Jesus tells this parable in Matthew 22. Okay. Starting at verse 1. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. And he sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention. They went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest, they seized the servants, treated them shamefully, and even killed them. The king was angry, so he sent his troops. They destroyed those murderers, burned their city, and he said to the servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those who were invited are not worthy. So go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you can find. And those servants, they went out into the roads, and they gathered all of whom they found, both good and bad. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. And when the king came to look at the guests, he saw there one man who had no wedding garment. He said to him, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? But he was speechless. And then the king said to the attendants, I don't have the last one. Yeah. But then the king said to the attendants, bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. Jesus tells a parable about an invitation. This is a wedding feast. One thing we need to understand about wedding feasts in Jesus' day is they lasted weeks, right? Or they lasted days, right? For us, a wedding feast lasts a couple hours. For them, it lasted a couple days. This also helps us to understand things like when Jesus turns water into wine, he makes 120 to 180 gallons of wine. Right, that sounds like a lot of wine for people like us who only celebrate for a couple hours. But when that wine is to be drank over the course of many days, then it's not so much wine, especially when the whole town is involved in the feast. Right? So this is a feast that's going to last several days. And the way that an invitation would be sent out is in advance they would send out the invitations, almost like a save the date, only it would be a little vague. They would say, be ready for a wedding. I can't exactly tell you when, but I can tell you where. And so they're sent out, and they're told to prepare and to be ready for the announcement that that the wedding has come. And so they've sent out this invitation, and the king sends out the servants to tell them, the time is now. The time that I've told you to prepare for, it's now. Come to the wedding. At which point, whether they're unprepared or they've got other things to do, they ignore the invitation. So he sends out other servants, telling them to give more details, right? right? Like everything is ready. Like it's been slaughtered, it's been cooked, it's on the table. The food is getting cold. Come. I want to pause here real quick. One of the arguments that my wife and I get into is dinner. Is it lunch or is it supper? Most people that I run into today, dinner is supper. It confuses me because for my grandfather growing up, dinner was lunch. And so anytime my wife says we're invited for dinner, I'm like, lunch or supper? Be more specific. This here says, see, I have prepared my dinner. The Greek word that is used there actually means brunch or lunch. It's in the middle of the day. It's very early in the day, right? So this one, okay, this isn't happening at the end of the workday, right? This is in the middle of the workday that he's saying, come to the wedding, which helps give context as to why some of the servants went back to work, because they're in the middle of work. 2, the Bible tells you that dinner is lunch, not supper. All right? All right, let's move on. So he sends out another batch of servants. The food is on the table. It's getting cold. Right? Again, they ignore them. They head back to work. Even worse, some of them are killed. So the king is angry. He sends his troops out, like bodyguards, a small little batch of mercenaries out to destroy the murderers, and he burns their city. Right? And those who were invited are not worthy, so go. Go out into the main roads. There's what's implied here, right, is leave the city. Right? The city that the king is in, what is implied here is leave the city and go out beyond the city, beyond the walls of the city, where the main roads are, and invite anyone that you can find out there on the main roads. I can't prove it. I'm just asking the question right now. Jesus is telling this story in the middle of Passover. He is in Jerusalem. He is in God's holy city. He is in the city. And I can't help but wonder if there isn't a dig here when he says, leave the city, because there's no one in the city that's worthy. I can't help but wonder if there isn't a dig at Jerusalem here when he says, leave the city. He says, leave the city, go out into the main roads. And so the servants did. And they invited everyone, the good, the bad, and ultimately the wedding hall is filled with guests. When the king comes out to greet the people, he does find one who is missing a wedding garment. In our culture, when we get an invitation for a wedding, we provide our own wedding clothes. In this culture, the host provides the wedding clothes. And so someone got into the wedding whom the host had not provided wedding clothes for, or the host had provided the wedding clothes and he just simply forgot. But either way, when the king asks, that no excuse, no excuses, no reasoning, nothing. He's left speechless, at which point the king says to him, he ultimately concludes that many are called, but few are chosen. I do believe that is a very intentional dig when Jesus says many are called, but few are chosen, because the Jews are God's chosen people. I very much do believe that this parable is a prophecy to the refusal of the Jews and the opening up of the gospel to the Gentiles. But as I read this story, right, there's a few things that I learn about an invitation, especially about the invitation that our God has given to us. One of the first things that stands out to me is waiting for the invited to arrive to the party. The king is incredibly patient. We go back to the very first parable, the one that I told before I started reading about the vineyard, right? The farmer sends out servants. Those servants are killed. And so he sends out more servants, right? The king right? Calls out to the people who are invited, and he says, come to the party. And everybody ignores him, but he sends out another reminder, right? Like God, over and over and over again, is ignored, and yet he continues to extend the invitation. Over and over and over again, his servants, his prophets, right? Think John the Baptist, Elijah, right? Ignored, murdered. Ultimately, Jesus, the way they treat the Son, right? Over and over and over again, they are ignored and they're murdered and they're treated poorly, and God is mocked. And yet over and over and over again, he sends out more servants to remind them of the invitation. Waiting for the invited to arrive to the wedding feast, the king is incredibly patient. However, as Roy shared, right? As Roy shared with our very first song that we sang, the king does not wait forever. The invitation does have an expiration date to it. Right? We do not have plenty of time. A time does come, right, when the king says, I'm done waiting. This is a theme throughout Jesus' teaching and his parables. Right? In the parable of the loaned money, right, the master does show up and he wants the return for his investment. And the parable of the vineyard, the farmer does return and he wants his fruit. Right? And this parable, right? Right? Jesus even teaches us, right? Whenever he instructs his disciples, he says, whenever you go to a town and you extend the invitation to the town, I'm paraphrasing here using my words, right? You extend the invitation to the town. If they don't accept your invitation, knock the dust off your feet, pick up your piece, and go on to the next town that does. The king does not wait forever. The invitation does have an expiration date. The other thing that we catch, though, is it is not just enough to be invited. Please don't. Yes. We must be dressed appropriately. We do not get in. Right? We can respond to the invitation. Everyone's invited. But just because I've responded to the invitation doesn't mean I get in. If I show up in my own clothes, in my own righteousness, I don't get in. Hey, the wedding clothes in this parable are very much an illustration of we are invited to the Father. The Father wants us on his lap, beside him, in conversation with him. And that is what Jesus came to do, is to restore us to our relationship, restore us to our partnership with the Father. But we don't get there by being good enough. We don't get there by stacking up good deeds and being a good person. We get there because Jesus Christ made the way. Go all the way back to the beginning, to our reading. He was invited to the Baseball Hall of Fame, right, by nothing that he did, right? He didn't play baseball. He didn't even care for baseball, probably didn't even watch baseball. But he got an invitation, not because of his grandfather or his great-grandfather, right? He wasn't even related to her. He married in. He was adopted in. There is nothing that said that he had any right to be there, and yet he got there because of the work of somebody else. Everything that we're invited to, we have gotten because of the work of Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Lord, I'm excited to see what this year brings. As I look at what it means to be invited, right? To receive an invitation, right? And just over and over and over again, we receive these invitations in life. The invitations to forgive, invitations to obey, invitations to learn, invitations to grow, invitations to trust you, to rely on you, to pour out our hurt and our soul to you. Lord, and all of this happens, all of this is possible because of your Son, Jesus. Even as we look at Jesus, we see over and over and over again invitations to sinners, to tax collectors, to eat in homes. We have an invitation. You have called us to something, and we have an invitation to follow, Lord. And as we chase this word this year, look at what it means to be invited. I pray that we would be a people that when we receive an invitation, that we would be a people that offers up a yes. Right? That we would not mock your servants, that we would not be a people that says, hang on a minute, I got to get back to work, that we would not be a people that says, not right now, I've got plenty of time. That we would be a people that when we sit down and we open it up to find that we're invited, that we would offer a simple yes. It's because of you, Jesus, that we have this invitation. And it's in your name I praise you and I thank you. Amen.